our fifth panel of the eighth seminar on human rights and business held by OMA. Our seminar has been trying to focus on diversity of knowledge and the perspectives in the that we should have in academic events, especially in a society that's so diverse as the Brazilian one. I am an associate researcher and a professor in the University of Pomba. I'm going to be moderating this panel, and the idea is to recognize the need for us to rethink the legal practice and making it effectively an activity for human rights. Before I start, I'd like to make there's some housekeeping. We have a Q&A at the bottom for questions. So if you don't ask questions to the speakers, you can use this feature during the panel. Besides that, there's also the option to raise your hand and ask your question on the microphone. Our event also has a simultaneous interpretation into Spanish and English available at by clicking on the globe icon. So the idea of the panel today is that our historical reality with colonization that led to many violations of human rights has an impact of the institutions of the present. There are many statements saying that the legal system needs a transformation that can allow the various segments of civil society to have an agency. So the situation today is of a threat to indigenous people with invasion of mining and also bills in the Congress to allow mining in their territories. And also the decision from the Supreme Court that has been put off on the thesis of temporal landmarking. And because of the crimes of mining in many rivers, such as Mariana, and far from a solution shows the challenges that we try to overcome. So in this process, we have to highlight the power of transnational corporations that promote a corporate takeover of public spaces, violating human rights that should be guiding the action of the state that gives in to the actions of these companies for development. And that's why I have to rethink and rediscuss the role of justice and create tools for popular participation so that people can be in the center of these decisions, not only for remedy, but also as prevention so that these violations are not repeated. First, to talk about this topic today, we have to be practical, and as the academy, we have to learn from those who are affected by this reality in the territory. And this panel, which is very diverse, we have the following guests that will have 15 minutes for their exposition, or talk actually. Thales Cavalcante Coelho is the Federal Public Prosecutor's Office. He holds a master's in criminal law from the Faculty of Law of the University of São Paulo and a bachelor degree of law from the Law School of Ribeirão Preto, and he's a coordinator of the Human Rights Business Working Group of the Federal Attorney for Citizens' Rights and a member of the Rio Doce Task Force created by the Attorney General's Office. Dinaman Tushar is an indigenous leader of Tusha people, an indigenous social activist, lawyer, and executive coordinator of the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, APIB, for the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples and Organizations of the Northeast, Minas Gerais, and Espírito Santo. Professor Cristiana Lozica holds a master's and PhD degree in political science from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. She's an associate professor at the Department of Social Sciences at the Federal University of Espírito Santo and permanent professor or full professor of the postgraduate program in social sciences at the Federal University of Espírito Santo. She together with OMA and other institution, she participates in this organization. Simone Silva is a member of the Commission of the Affected of Baralonga that was created after the Samarco crime in the Rio Doce. Um, and she's a mother, full-time mother. Welcome to you all. After the introduction, I turn it over to Mr. Cavalcanti Coelho for his talk. Thank you, Felipe, and I want to thank you and Manuela for the invitation. I'm really honored to be here. I want to thank you for the opportunity to meet again Cristiane, Simone, that I met when we did the public hearing on those people affected by the dam, and the satisfaction of hearing Dinama for the first time. For 15 minutes, I have prepared a small presentation just to give you context for the discussion. So I'd like to share my screen, please. If there's any problem, Felipe, please let me know. But I think that it is working. Is it working? Can you see my screen? Okay, great. Talking about justice systems and people's participation, I want to talk about the perspective of the Department of Justice as one of the institutions that acts in situations where I have human rights violations by companies. I want to talk about our learnings, our experience, not only in our working group of human rights and business, and also the task force Rio Doce. So I have 15 minutes, so I have selected two ways for people's participation for us to discuss, one for civil lawsuits and criminal law lawsuits. And restoration justice in for criminal lawsuits. There are many other ways for you to participate, but I think it's pertinent for us to talk about these two because of the potential of innovation and effectiveness of this law for communities and territories. Starting with ATIs, before we talk about what ATI is, I have to explain what it is. What's the context of creating ATIs and also the assumptions, not only factual, but also legal assumptions behind this tool. So they have been thought and created in the context of human rights violations, especially collective ones, not only by the state, but also private bodies in the exercise of economic activity. When you have big, big, uh, big, big, big buildings and dams, and also crimes as we had in Mariana. So the assumption would be the asymmetry in terms of political power, economical power, and social power between the state considering the possibility of being taken over by the economic power and the indirect power of the state, thinking now about state companies, state-owned companies, and also the asymmetry in terms of state and big corporations compared to peoples and communities that are a victim of human rights violations. So we have the need of having people participating as a requirement for us to provide a remedy for human rights violations. So that's why how we create ATIs. That basically it's a qualified participation tool for those victims of human rights violations in remedy process, not only legal remedy, but also extra legal remedies to reduce this power asymmetry between the state, the companies, and the people. The main one objective is to provide information to the victims to translate actually technical language into a language that people can understand. And the idea is also to create a participatory process in the community according to the idiosyncrasies of the community, to their own reality, so that we can have technical symmetry, in, including situations where they don't have the capacity to organize themselves. The ATIs are very specific, actually, because it's not only about transferring technical knowledge or scientific knowledge to victims. Actually, what we do is that we dialogue with the communities. So the knowledge that are produced and experienced by communities, their lived experience should be added and incorporated to the technical discourse. So the idea here is that we should have a knowledge ecology, as Boaventura has said, which is based on this idea of recognizing the diversity of knowledge, not only technical knowledge or scientific knowledge of modern science, but also the cultural knowledge, traditional knowledge from these communities. So basically, the idea is that knowledge is inner knowledge. What are the main characteristics? They have to be independent from the public power and from justice agencies. This is a challenge to do because justice institutions, they actually participate in in selecting in ensuring um, the law enforcement. So this is something that they have to do in terms of advisory, so that it maybe they could go against the justice institutions. So the ATIs would be the representative of the communities, more legitimate. Something else that's important is multidisciplinarity. I mean, the ATI has to be structured in a way so that we can cater to all the demands that we identify in terms of translating data for participation. Besides that, they have to be chosen by victims, and they need to have a trust relationship with them. So this is the main assumption. And actually, talking about trust, this is so important for us to have trust that we shouldn't have any kind of intervention from the legal branch in choosing the advisory bodies. We have identified in some cases like Rio Doce, there are some companies in the judiciary branch that they actually, I mean, there's an ideological positioning of this counseling. It doesn't make sense at all because there isn't such a thing as neutrality. Some people say ideology when they talk about other people's ideologies, but especially because this violates this trust relation between the counseling and the affected people, and they have to be paid actually by those who caused the damage. This is crucial as something crucial for remedying. the information technology agencies that are part of the law of Minas Gerais, of those affected by dams. And this is a right that we have in the Bill 2788 of 2019 for the policies for the people affected by dams. This is being discussed in the Congress. Uh, if you talk about information technology agency, especially in this context, could be saying something obvious, but this has led to so many discussions that I think it's important that any opportunity we have for us to highlight this. This is something that hasn't been discussed when you have human rights violations by companies. So it's important for us to discuss how feasible this is as a people's uh, participation tool in lawsuits. Just for us to understand, still talking about restorative justice for cooperation, this is what we're talking about today, right? Which is crimes against legal goods that are diffused, especially those by big corporations. The assumptions for corporate restorative justice, we have the ideas that in the cases we have crimes against these goods and also damage to the identity of people when it comes to legal interests and legal rights. And the other assumption is actually, since we have so many victims, it's difficult for you to identify and determine who the victims are. And the legal assumption is that there's no appropriate tools for remedy to these legal interests and neither of participation in the criminal lawsuit. There's no participation for collective participation tool. And those tools that we do have are for individual victims. I don't know, representation, charges, accusations. We don't have anything defined in our system in terms of the process to select and identify the victims for participating in these criminal lawsuits. For us to understand the corporate restorative justice, we have to start talking about restorative justice itself. So it is an alternative to the traditional legal or criminal system. It's not part of the traditional criminal system. The idea is to overcome the the paradigm of the traditional criminal system to have a restorative model focused on the damage and the needs, especially of the victims, and the victims play a central role in restorative justice, but also in the needs of the offender and the community. So the idea is to identify who did it, those who were affected by the action, not only direct but and indirect victims, and what are the values that were violated and what are the needs that came about from the violation so that we can promote social peace. This is very flexible, but you have coordinated sessions with spontaneous meetings between the offender, the victim, with the families, the community, creating a space for mutual listening and taking responsibility so that we can come up with an agreement, with a deal that everybody will go along with, repairing the damage and the measures for us to change to repair the social relations. I mean, when you first read this, it just sounds like far away from corporate crimes, economic crimes. But I'm going to show you just now that there are many things that we can use from restorative justice in repair process in human rights violations. Here, I have selected the main ones: damage repair, voluntarily, participation, empowerment, and consensus.
When we consider restorative justice, corporate restorative justice, I will try and show you how we can apply it, especially as regards corporate crimes. What are the main potentials for restorative justice? Probably the most important one is to diversify the final, the type of sentence in a way to actually help by holding companies accountable. Also, it also caters to the opportunity of letting the victims play a crucial role in the process, as well. And there's another thing, through a restorative justice process, the moment people from the community, the members, when they're faced with the representative by the company, those people are going to have the opportunity to actually set what they want, what's important for them in terms of reparation. Otherwise, without it, without this kind of participation, what would happen is that sanctions, they would be decided by a judge simply, and probably a judge that has no experience with restorative justice. The judge is never going to understand exactly what the victims have faced, and therefore a judge is not going to be able to reach the best ruling. Another thing, when we consider restorative justice, it's important that the company acknowledges the facts, that the company apologizes to people, and the willingness for dialogue. It's important that the companies actually have a conversation, a clear conversation with the communities, in an effort to actually rebuild social relationships that have been ruptured. This is highly important when we consider corporate criminality. Oftentimes, the community relies on the company that caused damage to them. Oftentimes, those people live in the same community and they need to keep a good relationship. Therefore, it's important that people involved, they have to set what's important, what's key for them to rebuild the relationships, and what they can do to prevent things from happening. Unfortunately, in Brazil, we still have no examples of restorative justice as regards corporate criminality. But I can show you a case from Guatemala, the Choi case, where a dam was built during the military dictatorship, and that happened many years ago. Some years later, there was a reparation process by a political group, a of dialogue and negotiation, and there were different stakeholders joining this group. People from the government, people who were affected by the construction of the dam, and even international observers. And the result was that the company that caused the damage, they acknowledged the mistake they've made, they apologized as well. We still don't have corporate restorative justice in Brazil, but now we have some indications in Brazil. How can we apply restorative justice during the trial process? Currently, the best procedure to do it, for us to change it from the traditional penal lawsuit, is to establish a penal persecution deal. Basically, what we are supposed to do is to follow what the Federal Justice Council tells us. Here, I would like to show you Samarco's case. I know I've been talking for long, but I want to talk about Samarco's case. After over 5 years, the most serious crimes, which were the homicide as flooding that resulted in killing people, plenty of the defendants were excluded from the process, especially people who worked for Samarco. For 2 years, there have been no hearings for this case because of the pandemic. And we believe that this would be a good opportunity for us to put together a penal non-persecution deal to make sure that people would actually join the process. We want to make sure that the people actually have the opportunity. Not only is popular participation important, but also to anticipate the sentence. Through the deal, we would hear over 100 witnesses, and we would have faster reparation for the victims that have been waiting for so long. I'm fully available to you. Feel free to ask me questions. Thank you, Thales. Thank you so much for joining us. For sure, we're going to have questions that relate to your talk. Now I would like to check if Dinaman is connected. Dinaman is an indigenous leader. The floor is yours, Dinaman. Good evening to all. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for inviting me. And what Tali said is really important. And I'm a postdoc candidate here at the University of Brasilia, and we've been discussing the relationship between indigenous people and large companies. Plenty of indigenous lawyers, we've been discussing this. And one of the issues that we talked about was the Mariana Dam rupture. that happened some years ago. Actually, not Mariana, Brumadinho. There were some indigenous communities that were affected by that accident. And I questioned, how can we measure environmental impact as regards to cultural things? And how can we identify that? Especially when we consider indigenous people, the relationship indigenous people have with the environment is completely different from other people. How is the judiciary going to incorporate this indigenous perception? Because for us, indigenous people, our relationship with the environment is completely different. And here we're talking about materiality. When we talk about environmental impact, especially as regards the relationship with companies, be it if they're building an enterprise, or maybe after something else happens. But when we consider Mariana and Brumadinho, companies oftentimes they can't assess the impact, especially as regards indigenous people. Indigenous people have memory long knowledge, and the justice system wouldn't be able to assess it. Even if they tried, they would not be able to assess it. Also, when we consider UN sustainable goals, they try to set a relationship which is corporate-like, and that we can't engage well with that. Unfortunately, today, the debate is really focused on when there's a new enterprise or when there's an environmental hazard that is affecting indigenous communities. And we're having here a discussion that oftentimes those companies, they don't come to build something that caters to the needs of indigenous people. My people, for instance, has been affected by São Francisco Dam, and their people didn't think about offering us a change for exchanging some plants. They didn't realize that the company would affect not only our territory, but our knowledge, and the kind of knowledge that is not recorded in writing. And it's impossible to measure that. Oftentimes, those companies, they feel that they shouldn't worry about that. They shouldn't organize and write down the names of the plants that are important to my people, for instance. Dr. Tales, he talked very well about social justice, that most of those companies don't think about protecting. And the companies, they ignore our laws as well. And the laws, they were meant to protect the environment. And what strikes me most, what annoys me most, is that when crimes happen, investors benefit. And for example, when we consider Brumadinho's case, Valley investors, they filed a lawsuit and they got their money back when that happened. But the families affected in Brumadinho area, they've never been they have received no compensation whatsoever to this day. And that dam, that accident, the rivers were contaminated, and those rivers were sacred for different indigenous peoples. We are not seeking money necessarily, but we want legal provisions that actually prevent companies from attacking people's lives. And we want those mechanisms, those provisions to be actually implemented to create treaties, agreements, and conventions that are truly respected. Some international agreements and conventions, they talk about the impact, but they never talk about punishment for the companies. They never talk about punishment for corporate criminality. And it's important to actually send those people to jail, not only have them pay something. What's the price that you should pay to a mother who lost her child? Oftentimes, judiciary could do something. Maybe they do something after there's an outcry. Then they do something. In Brumadinho and Mariana, there was a huge national outcry in Brazil, but there's been no compensation for those people affected. It's so inhumane because we're talking about lives, we're talking about people, we're talking about a spiritual relationship with people. For example, Ailton Krenak, who lost people who died after the dam rupture. Indigenous people wanted a clean river for them to do what they've been doing for centuries. And now, because of a huge dam, they can't do it anymore. How can we calculate that criminally and civilly? Therefore, the relationship companies try to create, they should create. And I went to the COP26 in Glasgow, and plenty of countries, they were boasting their actions to protect indigenous peoples. But we know that those countries host the biggest companies that cause social conflicts here in Brazil. Those are the companies that are contaminating rivers and causing plenty of problems for us here. Because when you send funds to enterprises here in Brazil, you feel like giving some peanuts to indigenous people. Companies, they've tried to set a protocol for relationships with indigenous people in the sense of learning how they should approach indigenous communities. And this came to a halt because they want to measure things that cannot be measured, which is our relationship to our territory, our spiritual relationship with our way of life. There's no respect for our beliefs, and they don't respect our original right. When we consider Brazilian laws, and in terms of our tradition as well, plenty of crucial points, they are necessary for indigenous people's survival. So if there's rupture because we can't have our territory, our ideas, and our beliefs if we lose what makes us indigenous. Then that is the type of impact caused by big enterprises. My people is the only one who used to go hunting using an arc, an arrow. And now we can't no longer go fishing by doing that. And that affected our way of exchanging knowledge. And when there's a huge impact, for example, a dam represents an irreversible impact. In our case, we never got our territory back and we've been fighting for 35 years now. So this relationship with companies, that companies only want to make money, they show no respect to human beings.
In the worst hypothesis, they talk about repair, remedy, so that the community can be paid peanuts to mitigate the impact. So I want to say that we do have to be worried about developing the country, worried about employment, but we have also to be worried about people, living beings, those who are in the forest, the animals, and this is what we do, not only for our existence as people, but we are fighting for those that are in the forest that cannot send this message, convey this message. This is what we're doing. We are fighting against the development that only kills and want to repairs destruction with money, which doesn't make sense at all to us. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. You highlighted very important aspects, the difficulty that law wants to give economic reparation for something that has a symbolic value of your ancestors. And we see this a lot when we try to do this, we see these difficulties. And I think now we are going to listen to Professor Christina Lusican to talk a little bit about people's participation, law in this context, because she has written a lot about it. Welcome, Professor Lusican.
Boa noite.
Good evening.
Muito obrigada, Felipe. Você me
Thank
escutam
you,
bem?
Felipe. Can you hear me
Imagino,
well?
né? Ai,
Can you?
perfeito.
First of all,
Muito obrigada, né? Antes
well,
de mais nada, ao
thank you
OMA,
to
pela
Oma
organização desse seminário.
for
Eu gostaria
organizing this
muito,
seminar, for inviting me.
agradeço, né,
I
em
like
nome do Organon, em nome
to
da
thank on
empresa,
behalf of
né, da
Organon and our
Organização
network
de
because I'm
Pesquisa Rio
representing
Doce.
the network of
É
research
sempre
Real.
muito bom participar dos
But
eventos do
I'm
OMA
always
por várias
honored to
razões,
participate
né?
in all my events and for
Grande
many reasons.
eficiência,
One,
brilhantismo, excelência.
because
Então, já
it's a
parabenizo,
great team,
parabenizo
so I'd like
todos
to
vocês
congratulate you
e
all
também
on
pela
organizing it,
capacidade que o OMA
and
tem de
because the capacity the
mobilização
OMA
de
has in
várias
terms of
pessoas, de pessoas de
mobilizing a lot
vários
of
lugares do
mobilizing
mundo.
people in different parts of the
É
world.
muito bom
And
poder
this is
criar pontes,
really
né?
important for us to create
E nos
networks
fortalecer
and
nesse lado
strengthen
da luta que é o lado
our
indígena que
struggle,
compartilhamos.
our shared struggle.
Eu vou essa noite trazer aqui,
So
né,
tonight,
para vocês algumas reflexões
I'm going to make
para
some
tentar, né,
reflections so
talvez um
that
pouco
we
dentro
can
da
somehow
minha posição de acadêmica, né, e do meu campo de estudo, trazer alguns elementos que possam nos ajudar
provide elements that
a
could
entender
help
um pouco
us
melhor
understand
esse
better
tema e também,
this topic,
claro, a
and
conseguir introduzir
also
aí, quem sabe,
some
né,
probably
algum
we
tipo de
can
caminho, né, para resolver
find a way
essas questões que são
to resolve
problemáticas, né, como a gente
these
já ouviu aqui por
matters.
duas
As we
edições
have
anteriores
heard, this is very
consecutivas.
problematic.
Então, o que eu queria, né, colocar um pouco
So
aqui
what I want to
em perspectiva são essas
share
duas
with you
dimensões, assim, da
is two
participação e do direito,
dimensions,
né, que é
participation
essa
and
mesma do
law,
Acondo. E que é também, né, eu acho,
which
o grande
is
desafio
the,
atual das
the great
instituições de
challenge
justiça,
that
essa
justice
questão toda que a
institutions
gente está
have,
falando
especially
de
when we
defesa
talk
de direitos
about
fundamentais, de direitos
defending
humanos, de defesa, né, de
fundamental
direitos dos povos
rights, human
originais,
rights, traditional
que
people's
a gente tem
rights, a
essa
situation
demanda, né,
where we have a
essa
demand,
urgência pela
an
participação,
urgency
né, além
for
da discussão de
participation
garantia de
besides
direitos, né? E aí eu acho que isso se
guaranteeing the
coloca
rights.
como uma questão para,
So I
evidentemente,
think
né, não só, mas sobretudo para
it's
as
not only
instituições de
about
justiça,
this, but
no
especially for
sentido
justice
de
institutions,
pensar o que
we
é
have
isso,
to
né, e
think
como
and
conseguir
see how
garantir, né,
we can
essa participação
guarantee
além de
the
todas as atribuições
participation
específicas das
beyond
respectivas
the
instituições de justiça e dos
specific
marcos legais que estão
justice
envolvidos
institutions and
na,
legal
na questão
frameworks involved
específica, né?
in this.
Então, para começar, eu coloco dizendo que a
First
gente
of all, I want to
tem
say
dois
that
princípios aí
we
básicos,
have
né?
two
O
different
princípio de participação e
principles.
a ideia de
The
participação que ela
idea of
vem muito
participation that
arraigada no nosso
has
sistema,
to
enfim, no
do
mundo
with
ocidental, que
our
é o qual a gente
occidental,
vive,
our
enfim, o
Western
hegemônico, né?
system,
E ao qual o próprio Estado de Direito, né, faz
and
parte,
the rule of law is part of
muito
it.
atrelada a
And
um
this
debate sobre
is tied
democracia, debate
to
sobre liberdade
discussing
política, né? Ou seja,
democracy,
participação
political
é
theory.
inclusão, né? Então, o
Participating is
assunto-chave, a
including. So the
questão-chave
key
para
concept, the key
gerar
discussion
participação é o de
related to
incluir,
participation
né?
is to
Agora,
include
isso
people.
abre uma série de
But
questões
this
que incluir
opens
quem,
a lot of
né?
issues, include
Principalmente, e incluir
who
como,
and
né?
include
E
how.
a gente ainda vai ter um outro ponto que é
And
incluir
there's
para
another
quê,
point is to
né? O que talvez
include
seja o mais
what
complicado da
for,
gente
which
definir,
I
porque
think this is the
talvez
one that's more
a
difficult for you to
ideia
define
da
because the
participação
idea to
promova
participation
de uma abertura para os outros,
um,
né? O para que eles
encompasses
provavelmente na própria
the
participação.
idea
Mas
of
enfim,
why.
do outro lado, o que a gente tem, né,
On the other
numa
end,
perspectiva de direito,
talking
está
about the
muito
law,
ligado, né, principalmente, enfim, dentro da
especially
perspectiva que
when
eu
we
estou
talk
traduzindo muito aqui, uma série de
about
debates que
the
o procurador,
debates
né,
that
muitas vezes
our
colocou,
prosecutor
enfim, muita
presented
complexidade,
with much
mas
more
o direito de
complexity,
face à participação,
but
ele
law
está muito,
in relation to
ou se a gente quer dizer de
participation,
face
and we can
aos
also say
conflitos
in relation to the
que a gente
conflicts
está lidando aqui,
that we
né,
deal with,
que tem a questão da
those that
violação de direitos humanos, ele
are
está
related to human
exatamente
rights
chamado, né, com um
violations,
papel de garantir,
has the
né,
role
garantir o quê? Né?
of
Garantir os direitos que foram violados, né? Se a gente
ensuring
consegue ter de
the
alguma forma esse
rights.
enquadramento construído, né, de
So
violação de direitos, é porque a
if
gente já
we
tem
talk about
um
the
mínimo,
violation
né,
of rights, that
de
means
condições e de elementos que nos
that we have
permitem,
elements
né?
and tools
Então
that
dizer
allow
que
us
há
to
algo
say
garantido
that
no princípio,
there's a
formalmente na lei,
guarantee,
né, no
formally
nosso
speaking, in the
ordenamento
law,
legal,
in our legal
que foi
framework,
violado. Então, o grande
that has been
papel, a grande
violated.
chamada aí
So
das
the
instituições de justiça é de
role of
garantir,
justice
né? Então,
institutions
eu acho que
is
a
to
grande questão, né, que eu acho que é
guarantee
importante,
the
olhando
rights.
principalmente os casos aos quais a gente
So
está lidando,
looking at
né,
the cases that we are
hoje,
working with
principalmente, né, no meu caso aqui,
today, especially in my case, would be the
da Vale,
disaster
Samarco e BHP
by
em
Vale,
Vale do Rio
Samarco, and
Doce,
BHP in
a
Vale do Rio
questão é
Doce.
que quando a gente vê
It's
isso
about,
de
okay, when
participação,
we
a
have
gente diz assim,
participation,
o que
justice
não pode acontecer
institutions,
é
we
que a
can't
participação
have
venha a colocar em
the
xeque direitos
participation
fundamentais, né? Então, essa é uma
challenge
primeira
fundamental rights.
preocupação.
I think this
Um
is the
processo
first concern.
participativo, ele nunca
A
pode ser
participatory
aberto
process can't
para
be
fazer com que a
open
comunidade
to
relativize e reduza os seus direitos,
reducing the
aqueles que já
rights
estariam
of
garantidos,
the
né, que já estariam
communities, those
previstos
rights that
no
are
ordenamento,
set
a despeito da
forth in the legal framework, the legal system. I think this is an important point, and it's not trivial, because in practice, unfortunately, we have heterogeneity. We can't generalize, but what we see, because of the model of these institutions in the world, dominated by economic power in the market, what we see is that participation would be the approval to justify some kind of flexibility of rights. This is the country of what the laws are for. So this is crucial. You cannot put a community in a position that should be harmed and have the right reduced. But we also have other questions. So we have to say that we are in a society that is unequal. We have inequalities, we have big differences, and I want to talk about the diversity of cultures in existence. So we have to consider that we have a communities just like the indigenous communities and the indigenous peoples, and we could include also, I don't know, the nature that is not necessarily at the same position to think the world the way it is as we do. And since we have this perception about these differences, we have to consider this. There is another dimension when we talk about participating in law, which is to understand the power concentration and how this relates to society and to these communities that are participating. If power is concentrated in the state in a heterogeneous way, the state's not a monolith, as we say. So the power is different according to the different roles and players. So the communities, when they deal with the different levels of the state, they have to understand who will ensure their rights. In these conflicts, we have also the market. And because they're close to the political power, economic power, and the powers that play into the state, they are closer to these hubs of power. So there's a basal problem in terms of participation, which is about weapon disparity and all that. But it's important for us to consider the disparity because we cannot understand participation saying that companies will be simply a party in the process. No, because they are in a advantageous position in terms of capacity to be heard. So what's the role of justice institutions in this sense? If we have to say that we would need many ways to guarantee the participation, it's not possible for us to talk about participation as it is set forth in TAP because there is participation, ATIs, although it is important and it is an important reference in the institution, it's a very important document, but it doesn't define participation and it doesn't set forth principles and foundations for the different tools for participation. Of course, it wasn't the objective of this document, but I just want to highlight for reflection that we have to understand that there are different parts of participation are related to the differences that I am highlighting here. So there are different participation spaces and senses. And I want to talk about three of them for us to start understanding what we're talking about. Usually we talk about participation in terms of decision. You can make a decision about something. This is to participate or to be heard. Participate is the possibility of giving opinions and hear and participate in a process. So we have decision, and we can also a process that's based on communication. So I said the idea why participation, if we think about ATIs, this is what it is. The idea is that what is open because we have a process with rules, mechanisms, but the community will have a say on the participation. So this has to do with communication, which is the exchange of arguments and ideas, but not only that, with gestures, acts, and ways that we have to expose our opinion. We can block a street, we can put up a picket line. So these are the ways that human beings found to be heard when they are oppressed. So this has to be understood in a broader way. Not everybody uses language the same way. Anyway, a third point that has to do with participation, which is the idea of pressure and influence. You guys let me know when I don't have time anymore. I'm trying to use only 15 minutes. But the idea of pressure and influence is important because not only through voting or an electoral process, but if you think about a meeting, everybody's going to vote for a decision. But this is not always the best solution because sometimes the decision making capacity is impossible because you have the conflicts of interests or we have minorities that would be oppressed in this kind of context. So participation also needs other mechanisms. And this is what I want to talk about when I started saying that the justice institutions have to make sure that participation and right guarantee are different things. So we have to guarantee participation, we have to guarantee the excluded, the minorities, are not hurt in this process. And if you talk about corporations, so that they don't hurt the communities. Trying to wrap up now and to be more clear about proposals for us to think this for institutions. I want to say that the first idea of participation when it comes to justice institutions that we have is that communities can have access to them. And this, I mean, we discussed this in law and social sciences. This is something that we also have in the law framework, which has to do with the access to justice. But in social, political conflicts or decision conflicts, and it's about how. So the access to justice goes beyond just getting to the Department of Justice and having the tools to get there or having legal counseling. You have to understand that in big conflicts, just like we had with the disaster, access to justice is to have access, to have the possibility of somehow participating in this process, contributing with how we how how justice will be enforced.
The other dimension that is connected to it means being heard. One thing is reaching people, and another different thing is to actually have their support, have people's trust in the sense that the community feels that their pain is heard and the violation of their rights is being acknowledged by justice. If we consider Real Doce's case, I've been working with law mobilization and building an articulation with those actors and have the defenders going to the territory. That's going to actually build this communicational dimension that means that we are showing people what the pain and helping people to see the pain, the oppression, the loss by means of the experience. Maybe we could also do it via traditional means, letters, for instance. But basically, we want to have this attention, and attention and access is something that the companies do it, for instance. It's an action that they do it. It's part of their culture, their action. They go to hearings with judges, they have meetings with prosecutors, but what we're talking about, the communities, it's not something unreal. Basically, it would just change focus and it would deal with different stakeholders. Felipe, I'm bound to finish my talk. When we consider institutional mechanisms to cater to the needs of this process, especially for the people, what we've managed with ATIs was to include them in deals and agreements. And what's the issue that we face now? The first problem is that making sure constitutional guarantees, when we have those, we make the process go slower, and the things that are dynamic, they are going to slow down, and it's part of the process. On the other hand, having no guarantee turns the process into something too open, that the process is not going to become a fact at the end of the process. Therefore, the big challenge that is institutionalizing the guarantees and making sure that people actually participate. The challenge would be building inclusion without making vulnerable groups lose rights. And there would be a situation where we're not going to lose rights, and then we realize that certain rights are hurting communities, such as indigenous communities. When we consider Munduruku Protocol, Mundurukus claimed participation, they claimed the right to take decisions, they claimed the right to speak for themselves, and at the same time, they claimed how they wanted to decide, how they wanted to be heard. Therefore, this is a very good example where we can show something that is institutionally organized. So considering that the lack of institutionalization, it shows that the challenges that rely on sensibilities, that it's more difficult to construct them, just like building something as the Munduruku protocol and the technical accessories. But at the same time, we need to provide proper support and security. Now I would like to highlight what happened to the technical supports. Few of them have been implemented, and those are being questioned now. And this is really serious. And as we're talking about participation and inclusion, we consider a whole community, and the community's work is being questioned and other activities haven't even been implemented. And why is this dangerous? Why could this be a problem? The thing is, mobilization by communities, if they're not protected by something that is supported and by law, the problem is we could have the exhaustion of participation because people can think participation is not going to change anything. Now, I would like to finish my talk. And basically what I would like to say is that we don't need beautiful words. There are a set of ideas and concepts that are created that involve the work of plenty of people, engagement of communities, people that stop working and they go to hearings, they go to cabinets, and they join the action. And all of that shouldn't be construed as something that is not important. And it's really serious that this is not materialized in terms of guarantees. And I would like to finish my remarks, and I hope that we can actually change reality. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you, Oma. Thank you, Felipe. Thank you so much, Christiana. And you've talked about something which is really important. The independent ATIs, for instance, plenty of them, they have not been protected by the legal system. Oftentimes, this looks like participation, but actually it's not. And we want participation to be real. And this is really linked to Dina Mann's remarks. Now let's listen to, now I give the floor to Simone Silva. Simone, go ahead. We can't hear you, Simone. Simone, please try and unmute yourself. Simone, please try and unmute yourself. Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Oh, yes, now we hear you. Good evening to all. My name is Simone Silva. I'm a member to the Commission of People who have been affected by the dams, especially Vale do Rio Doce, Samarco, and BHP. So I've been affected by those companies for 44 years now, ever since I was a baby in my mother's womb. I want to talk about justice, justice through the eyes of the victims. And this is something important to be approached. I would like to resort to the Bible, Matthew 27, when Jesus was taken to Pilatos. Pilatos was a weak judge because he was afraid of questioning the people and the priests. He knew Jesus was innocent. He knew Jesus wasn't a criminal. But as Pilatos was a coward, Pilatos was a judge back then, Pilatos supported the people and convicted Jesus to crucifixion. This has been happening in Brazil too. 6 years later, 6 years after the accident, here I am talking about law and rights because the victims are still at a loss. Judas gave Jesus back for 30 coins. And the same thing happens here in Brazil when we consider the mining companies. Now I would like to reminisce slavery times here in Brazil. Human flesh, my ancestors, they were sold as if they were animals. And people would heat up iron and mark ancestors, my ancestors. And that happens especially if you're a Black person, especially if you're a Black woman. And this has been happening to us over those years. My grandfather, he would tell me some things. Up there, there's a dam, and if that dam has a rupture one day, it's going to destroy everything that we've built. 13 years after my grandfather died, the dam had a rupture. That dam killed people. And justice that should be impartial, it isn't. And just like Judas, justice is impartial. Justice is partial. And we, the victims, we were affected by the rupture of the dam. Plenty of our loved ones were killed when that happened. And the moment we see justice is not doing their work, we are victims of the justice now. So today I was thinking what I should tell you, because for me, coming here as a Black woman and as a Black woman who was affected by those big companies, it's difficult for me to be in this place. And people in the past, they would see that when the fish were killed and the fish were in the river, some people would be like, oh, we can't touch the water. And Samarco, the company, Samarco evicted us of certain territories. Samarco Valley, they are racist companies. They persecute vulnerable people because most of the dams are built in communities, especially in communities where people don't know things. Those people, they have the right to have rights, but they don't know about their rights. Our community has vanished. Justice is acting against the victims. They're acting as if they were supporting the mining companies. Now the Barra Longa Commission is being persecuted by justice. We're under investigation. I'm not going to say that we're better than other commissions, but basically we are the only commission that has endured. And because we endured, because we have actually organized, anywhere in the world, if you want to fight and prevail, if you're a victim, you need to keep on struggling. We've been enduring. We decided to endure, and we're organized collectively. Last week, a company here in Barra Longa, Cairn, came over to investigate the commission. They were investigating a wonderful work that the technical team conducted here in Barra Longa. And we know that we did a good job. Otherwise, we wouldn't be under scrutiny. That's the reason why they're investigating us. So the role of the support has done an amazing work. And plenty of us, we are illiterate. And this team, they came over and helped us. This consultancy is helping us. And those people doing the investigation, they came to my job, and then they made me feel awful. And then I told them, why are you here interviewing me and asking me these questions? Our rights are being canceled in the current scenario, not only at municipal level, but at state and federal level too. The government doesn't like mobilization because they know organized people are going to oust bad politicians. And they asked me, who is the boss in Barra Longa? What's MAB for you? And then I told them, MAB is something that came over to help us when we thought that we had no other hope. And MAB is the movement for people who have been affected by the dams. I'm here struggling against the mining companies. And what has MAB done for you? And then I told them, It's an organization that has helped me, and they're bringing hope and knowledge for people. The moment the dam was destructed, you know, Barra Longa is the only city in the basin. That city, the mud was taken from rich neighborhoods and thrown in Black people's neighborhoods. This is Barra Longa. This is what happened here. This is environmental racism. The people who know the territory are the people who live in the territory. Those are the people who actually know the area. And after the dam ruptured, it was as if we became foreigners in our own territories. We can't even recognize our territory.
I mean, the kitchen where we would cook for family dinner. I can't find this kitchen in my grandmother's home anymore. I cannot identify where we would meet for parties, where our family, one of the most beautiful families there, because we were beautiful people who had communion. Today after the burst, because when there is a dam burst, we burst the families, we burst traditions and history. Our family today, we can't live with one another because some people are not talking to one another anymore because of the reparation published by the media, on the news, on the internet, on the YouTube. They talk about valley reparation in territories, but this is not the reality that we have here in our territory. Families, they're they're broken. We don't have any marriages anymore. There are no ties anymore. I mean, it's been 6 years already, but unfortunately, if I don't die before that, I'll participate in 7, 9, 10 years. I'll be talking about what hasn't happened, which is reparation. And the only time that my family met was for the funeral of my uncle and my grandmother that gathered together all my family after this crime. So the affected people cannot have ATIs in the territory. But Marco, Valley, they'll have there'll be money washing. Everybody knows that these companies will be laundering money. I think it was 7.9 that I heard. I don't remember anymore. But then you go to Beto Rodrigues, which is the heart of the crime. Everybody knows it. It's like 10 houses that they built after so many years. But only four, I mean, four people who got their houses back, they're dead already. So this week we are negotiating reparation with the preservation of victims. How can someone who lives in air conditioning, many of the companies are not from Brazil, Colonel, and all these companies that are not from Brazil, they're foreign companies. They don't know the reality of my territory. So, I mean, how can people in a air-conditioned office will be deciding upon the lives of the affected? And this week was a surprise because the hearing was canceled. The hearing was going to happen in December was canceled. When I saw this news, I said, "Wow, this is a trick." And we knew there would be um it was bad news. I mean, to the less there was this something published from these offices with air conditioning, and they published, and I was really went berserk. For me, it was a betrayal. There was a release saying asking for 50,000. But how can health be worth only 50,000 reais? I mean, I can be using I'm gonna use I because my daughter is one of the victims, one of the contaminated children. Today, my child has a lot of inflammation and intestines in the brain. Our intestines is like a sieve. So the sieve is breaking up, being corroded by metal. And I mean, I'm fighting for my daughter to be treated. Her first sessions of treatment, I had to pay one. I mean, the cost was 100,000 reais. For me to go to the city, I spent 5,000, and then with housing, I I spend more money. We know that with children you spend more money, and the commissions. I mean, the committees. I'm sorry the way that I'm saying, but part of my French, but they said about. I mean, they're talking about 50,000 for everybody. I mean, I'm not the affected one. I was hit. I mean, I'm a victim since I was in the my mother was pregnant with me. So I'm fighting for health so that people can have access to health care. A test will cost 50,000 reais. And even worse, in the reparation from the 12th Secret Court, children are not considered to be affected. They are not entitled to compensation. For you to be entitled to compensation, you have to have been at least 16 years of age. We know that the judge will go along with a proposal of 50,000, and the court meeting was put off. Why was it put off? And I said, if healthcare is not in the agenda, I don't want to participate in this meeting. And they put it off. And then in February, because now that the meeting was put off for February, they're gonna make a decision, and we're gonna be paid only this. So I'm really pissed. Actually, my blood pressure went all the way up to 22, and how come? The doctor told me, Simone, maybe your daughter will not be an adult. If she lives to be an adult, she'll have to see a doctor for the rest of her life. How come? How come someone who hasn't been affected, because in Barra Longa, they say there's health hazards, hazards actually. Either you take the off the tailings or the dam, but we don't have any protocol because like I say, we didn't do anything. We didn't do anything. We didn't fight for it. This is not. This is a lie. We fight all the time. My name is Resistance. I say that Simone Silva is only in the pictures because I was a chicken, I was shy, I wouldn't talk to people. I have a picture that shows that I was like this. When I saw my history, my identity being erased, my daughter's health, my people's health being wiped out, I became a lion. Today I'm a lion. I didn't have access to all studying and schooling. So I want to talk about law as a layman. The law has to be used for the good. The pledge you make should be used for the good. That the academy, the space that you guys occupies in the academy, that oftentimes is with the public money, with our money, that you use it well. Don't be so to the evil to say I'm gonna be just a full lawyer, but use your knowledge to defend life, to fight for life, and not don't use your knowledge as a lawyer or engineer or physician to punish the affected. Use your knowledge for the good. So as Talis is here, I want to say that you know your the history of population, but we still believe in you. Our hope is in your hands. So even if there's pressure, I know that you have a lot of pressure. I know how it is because many of those who started with us in this struggle are not with us anymore. They're not together with us fighting because we know the pressure that they suffer. Don't give up fighting for the victims. Don't use your knowledge for the evil. Never give in because the population, the affected, still believe in justice. They still believe in the Department of Justice. They in the attorney of the federal government. Being a shareholder of a mining company is very easy because I'm in the air conditioning office. I travel on a plane. I can go to any country, to any city. If there are victims in the territory, 200 people in Brumadinho, so what? Maybe, I don't know, 20 that died in Bento Rodrigues, so what? It's only 20. Don't say 19 was 20 because there was a mother pregnant with a baby. If they hadn't taken the baby out of the belly, this baby would be living today. So when you say it, don't say it 19, it's 20. So I want to thank for the space. For me, this is really important. I like to thank and say that we believe in you as partners. The academy should be used for the good, okay? Used as a space that I can't occupy, that the affected can't occupy because we don't have the right to participate in negotiations. We don't have the right to negotiate, having some coffee with all this privilege. This is a privilege to sit in at a table of negotiation. So use this for the good. And then the shareholders of these mining companies, uh, human flesh shredders, with all the mining that they take away from us, that they have to be conscious. They have to have feeling, and sentiment to know that our lives are worth than just a piece of ore. We thank you, Simone. We thank you, Simone, for your participation, for being so compelling and so truthful. I'm gonna go move on to the questions. I see that Professor Manuela wants to say some words to you.
Olá, gente.
Hello,
Boa noite.
everybody.
Eu não
Good
tive a
evening.
oportunidade
I
de
didn't have the
ir,
opportunity
também cumprimentar a
to
Simone.
say hi to
Muito
Simone.
obrigada
Good
pela
evening,
sua
Simone. Thank you
participação.
for your
Desculpa
participation.
depois, eu tinha falado com
Because I
outros
had
membros
greeted the other members
da
before you
mesa.
joined the call.
Obrigada a todos e todas por esse debate, né? Por vocês terem aqui disposto, né, do tempo de
Thank
vocês.
you, everybody, for taking the time for this debate. I think this is really important. As we are part of these networks in Rio Doce. So whatever input you can have is crucial. I want to talk to what Thales and the others were saying, especially when we talk about the affected suffering, and then we see how human rights are violated. I was thinking about what we consider to be justice. When you talk about restorative justice, um, it's about dialogue, it's about rebuilding relationships, but we all know that when we talk about human rights in business, we know that the relation that the business has, historically speaking, in the territory is to perpetuate violations, violence that are va- that are hidden s- behind the discourse of development and benefits. But it is something that I like saying, that development is to go against the development of people in their territory. So these changes the equations of power. So the company is a more powerful player over the communities. So to rebuild the violential relations, is it possible? How can restorative justice, how can this be a reparation tool for human rights? The affected will be playing a leading role in this situation. So this is what's missing. The cooperation can't be the dominating party in the negotiation when it comes to violations. So how can we do it? Of course, I mean, we would have to rebuild a lot of relationships that have been changed and shouldn't be rebuilt. And this is where we have a hard time, because I don't know if the company should go back to the territory. I don't know if there's room for it without changing this paradigm that the company violates human rights. And the only way to keep it from repeating is to hold the corporation liable. As a public server, we can't participate in many of the competitions, and this is a reality. Some things you cannot repair, so we should avoid it. So it's a really hideous or heinous violations, like human rights violations, nature violations. So that's why that considering the other speakers, I think that when you talked about the legal system, you didn't consider this radical aspect. So thank you very much. I don't know who wants to answer first, maybe Thales. I was just waiting because there was a question on the chat, but I can reply as you wish. I I think I'm gonna read the question later because I think it's the same person. Manuela, I think it's really pertinent what you said. We also have these concerns. First of all, Restorative justice is not a panacea. It is an alternative that can be well applied or not well applied. If it doesn't work, if it doesn't deliver the objectives, we have the legal system, the legal criminal system. But we have some assumptions. We need to have dialogue and accountability of the company. So we have the victim plays a leading role in determining the reparation. Should it go back to how it used to be? No, because this is what led to the damage. So the restoration will be defined by the affected. Restorative justice, I think this is a reflection that we have to make for this kind of violation because corporations and justice bodies, especially for criminal lawsuits, they have to listen to Simone, especially in criminal law. There's no space for Simone to talk, to express her pains and how she was affected and all that.
Unfortunately, there's no room for that. And we consider that obviously communities and the territories are highly affected by companies. However, oftentimes the company itself has victims within the company. Plenty of Samarco employees, most of Mariana's people, those are the people who depended on the river's water, and they're both Samarco's employees and also people affected by Samarco's actions. Therefore, a process of reparation with participation through restorative justice is key. Is it easy to attain? No, not at all. And the experiences that happened internationally show us that it's difficult. One, the companies need to be open for dialogue, and two, companies need to be trained to act effectively. Usually companies are in the defensive because they don't want to engage in the process. Oftentimes we question, are companies willing to restore? And the companies need to face the fact that they might be criminally charged. And when we consider Samarco's case, that's clear. And plenty of companies may try to steer clear of the stigma of being criminalized. And maybe this could help us so that other companies don't do the same. But thinking about pragmatic things, only environmental crimes are, companies are only punished by environmental crimes, and those and the punishment is really light. It's not super serious and difficult for the companies. Probably, usually we expect that there are concessions by the companies and people affected by the dam accident. There's a need for criminal punishment, and that punishment could be made for the people who are taking the decisions in the company. For instance, if this works and we have the support by people who have been affected, maybe we could have restorative conferences in each and every micro region in Rio Doce's river basin so that the communities represent themselves. And the moment they said this wouldn't work, we need to change it so that the sentence is decided by people who have been affected. For instance, if we decide to place a fine, not for the people who were affected, but to the Brazilian government, for instance, we need to identify who's the best person, what are the best actions to be taken. Is the public office, are the judges, actually the communities are the ones who need to have a say on that. And I just want to wrap up. Basically, we want the companies to admit the mistake they've made. And this is core for restorative justice. And we know that the symbolic effect is highly important and it's really close to a criminal sentence. I don't think that's ideal, corporate restorative justice. And I think that it offers some opportunities for us to do something, to maybe have some penal answer to the crimes. And I believe that this is something that we need to start. And considering that we're scholars, we are working for the justice, we need to try and do something and maybe get better results than the results we have got until now. Thank you so much, Thales. Does anybody feel like adding final remarks? There are some questions here and some questions by by Renata Pasquarin. She's a member of our team.
Mas pode ser
Do you
depois,
feel like
Felipe, depois de
I
todas
ask a
essas
question?
perguntas.
Maybe, Felipe, after you ask the questions. Renata Pasqualin, she asked, she's asking, is there a parity of arms between corporate restorative justice? And what happens if the company doesn't agree with the requests by the victims? And Simone, and she's asking to Simone, what's going to happen to the movement for people affected by the dams in Barra Longa? Go ahead, Thales. We don't talk about arms parity in restorative justice. We have another logic. And what's key is parity of representation between the victims and the defendant. It's important that there's participation and representativeness. Then the dialogue is going to be mediated by facilitators who are going to resort to restorative justice. There's no parity of arms. And if the company doesn't agree with measures, there are three possibilities. So for restorative justice, it can work out, it can fail. And the other thing is that the defendant doesn't even join the process of restorative justice. And all involved need to participate voluntarily. So when any of the parts refuses to participate, and then the alternative is traditional panel system to rule on the case. Chris,
Então, muito
the
rapidamente,
floor
só
is
para não
yours.
me metendo nessa discussão, mas
I'll just like to add a
então,
comment
assim,
to
eu
this.
acho, né, que, enfim, eu peço desculpas, enfim, né, com todo
I
respeito
apologize.
ao Thales e ao teu trabalho, eu acho
And
que, né, as
Thales,
intenções são sempre as melhores,
I
mas eu
know
tenho
you have the
dúvidas
best of
sobre
intentions,
as possibilidades da
but
justiça
I really
restaurativa
question the
nessas situações, mas
possibilities
são dúvidas
for
mesmo,
restorative
né,
justice.
desconfianças e também
They are
críticas em função
doubts and
de coisas que
some
eu já observei,
criticism
né? Mas eu acho que
based
isso
on
é
things that I
possível
have
se a gente abrir
observed
o debate,
for
né?
now, but I
Agora,
agree with
não
you.
abrir o
We need
debate e
to
ficar
at
olhando e
least
tal, uma coisa
discuss
sem ter
or
discussão.
maybe
Mas assim,
resort to
respondendo a tua
something
pergunta,
without
eu
thinking
acho que
about
assim,
it
tem uma
well.
série de discussões que foram já
There are plenty of
produzidas, né, sobre
discussions
justiça
that have
restaurativa
been done as
contemporânea,
regards
mas eu acho que tem
restorative
uma
justice,
questão que,
but
primeiro,
I
que eu
believe that
sempre
there's
venho
one thing.
observando, né, que todas essas iniciativas que já
All of those
partem de um
initiatives
pressuposto,
that
né,
they
que é de
consider
sair
the idea
de não admitir a
of
dimensão
not
conflitiva que
admitting
existe,
the
né? E
conflict
muitas vezes
that
de um
is
antagonismo exatamente que está
connected in the
posto ali, né?
situation and
Por
the
indivíduos existentes que
antagonism
são
there,
diferentes e que estão
considering
fora,
different
né?
logics
Entre
of
empresas e
life,
comunidades, e aí
especially when we
tem
consider companies
atividades
and
tradicionais, a
communities,
própria
and when we
defesa
consider
da
traditional
natureza, enfim. Eu
communities,
acho que a gente
nature
vem
itself.
vendo então que essas iniciativas
We've been
elas tendem a
seeing that
fracassar,
those
né?
initiatives
Então eu acho
fail.
que tem um problema para mim que ele é de
I
saída, né? Que é
believe
um
that
problema
this
de um
is
pressuposto de
a
que já
problem
parte
related
desses dados,
to
né?
the
Porque quando a gente
starting
adota
point.
uma ideia
The
de
moment we
restauração,
adopt the
né?
idea of
A gente está
restoration,
partindo de
the
um
idea
viés,
is
sabe?
linked
E aí
to a
por exemplo, se a
certain
gente for pensar numa
bias,
perspectiva indígena,
and we
né?
consider
Já é
indigenous
um viés
perspective,
que coloca eles em
it's
prejuízo,
a
por exemplo, né? Só para
bias
trazer isso que eu acho que é muito
that
evidente, mas se a gente puder
doesn't
pensar
help
em
indigenous
outros
people.
aspectos, eu acho que
We could even
é
consider
muito
other
típico,
aspects.
sabe, da nossa estrutura
Overall, it's
de
typical of
Estado, jurídica,
our
enfim,
state and legal
essa,
structure
enfim, esse medo, né, ou esse
to
pânico em
be
relação ao conflito
fearful
e em
of
relação a trabalhar
conflict.
com o
We are
conflito como um
fearful
dado
of
real,
dealing with
sabe?
conflict
Enfim,
as
eu
something real.
obviamente que aí eu também já encerro, eu acho que a gente não
I'm
pode,
wrapping
né, quando
up,
eu falo no
and
conflito e
I
tal,
think
não quer
that
dizer que a gente
when
vai
when I
tentar
talk
no
about
conflito
conflict,
pensar em alguma
I'm not saying that we're going
saída.
to
Até
be
recentemente
to
eu
keep the
comentei, assim,
conflict
acho
and
que a
never
gente precisa sair de
coming
uma cilada que
to
está colocada
a
atualmente,
resolution. But the
que
thing is, we need to
entre
overcome certain
a tomada
problems,
de
which
decisões,
is
né? Eu acho que o
being
caso
placed
do
between
doce, ele mostra muito bem como as
decisions
duas coisas
and
são muito ruins do jeito que
agreements.
elas estão sendo
And when
feitas,
we consider
né? As
real
decisões que
dose,
são tomadas são
things
muito
are really
ruins para os
bad
atingidos e
because the
foram muito ruins
decisions
para os
taken
atingidos.
are bad
Então,
for
eu
people
acho assim, e aí
affected, and the
essa
agreements
por
are
isso que é
also
extremamente
bad for
importante são
people
esses de
affected.
buscar um caminho que
Thales, I
possa
understand you're
trazer ali a
seeking a
possibilidade,
path
né, que não seja
for us
somente dois lados
to try and
colocados
do
em conflito
something that is
exclusivo,
not the
né?
two
Mas
bad
só não
things
sei
that
se o
are not
caminho
good
conceitual
for
da
people that are
restauração com toda a
affected.
carga que envolve
But I
dentro
don't know
é
if
melhor. Eu
this
ainda acho que a gente
restoration
deveria
justice process
experimentar
is the
mais, a
best
gente deveria
option.
valorizar
Maybe
soluções
we
secundárias,
could try and
administratórias.
see
Muita
solutions
coisa já
that
tem,
are
né? Muita
working.
solução foi dada
Plenty of
para esse caso,
things are
né? Olha tudo que a
working.
Simone
Plenty of
fez
solutions
representando,
have been
né?
implemented.
Tem
We need
muita
to hear
coisa e eu acho
Simone.
que às vezes é isso, assim, sabe? Bastaria talvez a gente
Oftentimes,
valorizar
maybe
isso.
we
E
could
aí, enfim, é por isso que, mais uma vez, quando a gente
appreciate
lê
certain
a história,
elements.
retoma a história toda e vê tudo que
And when
aconteceu
we
e como
look
que as
back
empresas
at
respondem,
history
elas
and how the
respondem, é por
companies
isso que, mais uma vez,
responded,
eu
that's
acabo sendo
why,
objetiva
once
nisso, das
again, I
possibilidades, dos
don't
caminhos que
think
já foram tentados,
that the
que foram
options we have
conceitualmente
tried
defendidos
before
e
that
que,
were
enfim, eu acho que
conceptually supported, I
nos
believe
apresentam
that
uma
they're not
solução para
going
esse
to
futuro e
cater
vice-versa
to
e por aí, né? Mas é
the
isso.
needs that we have now. That's just my opinion. Thank you, Christiana. I agree with you. Plenty of the clauses are not abided by companies. And I believe that Chris talked about it based on her work over the last 6 years. I'm giving, can I? Oh, I need to answer. I just want to say something. Simone, I'm sorry. I think that you should be the last person to talk and wrap up the meeting, but I need to answer Christiana and say restorative justice doesn't deny the conflict. It acknowledges the conflict and tries to face the conflict as an alternative to the traditional penal system. I'm not talking about civil level process. We're going to consider, just like the penal system considers that there's been one violation. And for example, only environmental issues in Brazil take into account other human aspects. And maybe the judge is going to put together the process and the judge is going to impose a certain fee to the company, or let's say things that the government could do to serve the community, not only about the territory, but also the community identity that is linked to that environmental violation. This is the discussion, and restorative justice that we are setting forth here is just an alternative to the traditional remedies we have. And pragmatically, restorative justice wouldn't be simply implemented, but restorative practices, restorative conferences, they would be used in the process for legal agreement in an effort to repair all of the all prior agreements. For instance, an agreement that the communities would have a say in the restorative conferences. In those micro regions, people could have a say and do something, and then the companies could come together. And the experience I had negotiating with the companies is that the companies are worried about money. How much is going to be spent for that reparation measure? For the company, if the judge rules on that, or if the community decides how the money should be spent, the company doesn't care much. But for the communities and the victims, that's a huge deal. So when we consider non-persecution agreements, justice could resort to better participation mechanisms. We are going to use the traditional ones, collective rights and everything, but also resort to new options. Thales, thank you so much. Now we have a question by Renata to Simone, and Renata is asking, Simone, how can we help MAB? I would also like to ask the other panelists if they would like to deliver final remarks before giving the floor to Simone. Dinaman had connection problems, and that's why he's not back. to the Q&A session. So this is the reason why Dinaman is not here with us now. I would like to thank each and every speaker for being here today. And Simone, we would like to listen to you once again. The floor is yours.
Cristiana, dizer que as suas perguntas, a sua fala nos representa.
Christiana, I would like to say that what you said, it really connects with me. And when I told Thales that justice shouldn't give up on us, it's because we who have been affected by the companies, we sometimes feel that we're not moving forward. Authorities are there. Our work, our commission, MAB, is there. We're doing work. And it's been really difficult because we often lose. When Dr. Edmundo and Dr. Elder left the process, they provide us with all the support they could because they dared to fight the system. There are authorities that oppress people there, and we know that they are oppressed. And we, people who have been affected by the dams, we know that oftentimes the institutions can't actually help us. For example, this meeting by the National Council of Justice, after Dr. Edmundo left, he supported us in the health part. He knew everything about our health. And after Dr. Edmundo left, we never talked about health anymore. There hasn't been one single meeting with Brazilian authorities to discuss health. And those companies are moving forward. Those companies, those authorities are taking decisions that are not helping us. We are here, we are being persecuted because somebody signed a document. It's really difficult for us to endure any longer. We want to trust you. And that's why I was telling Thales and Christiana to keep on struggling. Carol, she's amazing. She's a fighter. And all the process of violence in the territory.
Today, we are being persecuted because we are only women. Only women resisted. We don't have any men in our committee. Women haven't accepted to kneel down because they're the ones who suffer more as affected in terms of sexual exploitation. Women will be looking after the children, after the home. Women are the ones who who fight. We are majority because we have courage. We resist. There's a lot of sexism, a lot of violence. So I want to use this as space because in our committee we need protection of human rights. If the everybody talks about this guy of the human rights, does he exist? If he exists, we need the protection of human rights. We're being persecuted. We're afraid of going out on the street after the lawsuits. They say Simone is there because she got paid. Women are doing this because they have gotten paid. They don't want anyone else to get paid. No one says the truth. They don't say that we are empowered women that have understood the process, and we know that the right to healthcare is not paid with only 50,000. I cannot sign and say that I will never file a lawsuit because I was paid 50,000. This doesn't exist. I mean, this is almost the end, but I have to use this as a space. Um, when we filed the lawsuit in London, and then that's where the novel started of our lawsuit in London that was canceled. They filed again. Most of the affected that are there are fighting for the right to the water. And then we had the court that said that sentence that we have the right to water. But we have to be politicized. Even though if we don't have any studying, schooling, we have to do politics in church, at home. We need to be activists. We cannot accept to be massacred because if we have survived in Brazil, we are activists. If we are living, it's because we are activists every day. We resist every day. This is what I wanted to say. Our committee is being investigated, so we need attorneys because we don't have the ATIs to defend us. We don't have the attorneys anymore to defend our committee, to defend the women who are resisting, who haven't accepted to kneel down and say, yes, sir, we'll accept it the way it is. We're being persecuted just because we said no, because we're women. There are many Black women in our committee. We are poor people. That's why we're being persecuted, because we don't accept to kneel down. So we need attorneys because we don't have the money. We don't have the money to pay attorneys. We haven't been given any money. We're just volunteers fighting against all this past persecution. We are afraid to go out on the street at night to walk alone because we're being persecuted and threatened because we haven't kneeled down. I mean, if you said about help, any help is welcomed because this is how we can defend ourselves, defend honest people, people who haven't given or given in. And today we are investigated as criminals, as the murderers from Samarco and Bali have never been investigated, have never been investigated, but the committee is being investigated. I mean, women are investigated. I can see that women that are resistant, they're being investigated and persecuted. These are the men that come and talk to the men that come and talk to us, that persecute us, that want to prove by any means that we are criminals just because we were taught to resist. And through these movements, we became activists. We, we have to help the community and to make our scream heard not only in Brazil but in the world. This is what we need because unfortunately, if we depend on the justice in Brazil, we're going to be massacred. We're going to keep being massacred in our territory. We're still slaves in our territory because mining will slave you, will kill you, will divide and separate us. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Simone. So we're going to wrap up now, and I hope that the panel provided or shed some lights to the consciousness and awareness of everybody, and I wish you all a good night. I just want to say something. I'm sorry. I know the interpreters are actually really tired because of interpretation. Like to thank the interpreters for staying because I mean there's a time for them to be working. Since we have a lot of students, I think when we talk about adjusting institutions, it's nothing to be, it's not personal. It is the role of the judiciary branch. And we have to say it. We have to say it. We have to have people, everybody in the room and talk about it. And Thales is from the judiciary branch. I mean, we are always fighting for participation, that the affected can participate. It's actually for us to hear what they have to say. Exactly. So I just wanted to say that this is the dynamic. It's really important for us to have all these stakeholders participate. I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank the interpreters for the moderation. You guys, everybody has a good night. Courage, Simone. We're together in struggle. You
Obrigada,
can count on
boa
us.
noite.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.